How you doing, guys? This is Eric from RuleTheWasteland.com. This video is about 7 specific physical feats or benchmarks that I think most people who want to consider themselves prepared and be prepared for pretty much any given situation should be able to reach. And it's okay if you don't reach them now. I just recommend that these are something you should strive for. Most of them are not incredibly difficult. You should be able to do all these, but they're not so easy that everyone should necessarily be able to do them right off the bat. I know there's a big stereotype that's been around for a while of preppers being, these bloated fat people who can't do anything, can't go up a flight of stairs, just have a bunch of guns lying around. And to what extent that's true doesn't even matter. The fact is, if you're preparing for things getting worse in any way, it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's a weather disaster, social unrest, economic hardships, grid down, WRL, whatever it is, it doesn't even matter. If you are struggling physically in any way now, when nothing's wrong, then certainly that's going to be an issue in any sort of shit van or disaster scenario, even if it's an everyday thing like a car breakdown or, anything like that. So certainly you should be focusing on fitness as part of your day-to-day life, health and fitness anyway, but these are some specific things that I wanted to mention that I think you just keep in mind when doing training or when trying to gauge where you're at, things that I think that you should be able to do. And if you can't do any of these, you're probably going to find yourself in some situations where you might be struggling pretty badly physically if there is a serious shit hit the fan scenario. The first thing that I think that everyone who wants to be prepared physically should be able to do is to walk 15 to 20 miles a day for at least several days in a row without being completely ruined. Some of this is just going to be physical toughness, how your body can withstand the friction and just the impact, things like that, just from physically walking that far in that amount of time. But there is definitely a fitness component related to that too. If you haven't gotten off your couch for months and then all of a sudden you try to walk 15 to 20 miles a day, several days in a row in a stressful scenario, you're going to be fucked up in a big way. And for me personally, my skin is not soft. I mean, it's not rugged. It's very soft, like on my feet. I callus up fairly easily, but then it goes away really quickly too. So if I haven't been doing things like ruck marches or wearing boots or anything like that, and then I go into these things, I have to be ready for my skin to get fairly tore up. So part of this is just being prepared for the actual physical task of doing it, but then the physical, having tape, moleskin, things like that, and the mental side of it. But obviously there's a fitness and endurance component to that too, and that's what I think everyone should be focused on, because there's plenty of situations where in any sort of grid down, certainly any sort of EMP or anything like that, you're going to have to be able to walk a lot. And if it's a bug out situation, especially a serious one, you might be walking hundreds of miles if you really have to get out of a crazy area. I think these scenarios are fairly unlikely, but they are possible, and that's what you need to be prepared for if you want to be prepared. The second feat of strength that I would recommend preppers should be able to accomplish is sort of along the same lines, but I think it's with a bicycle. I think you should be able to bicycle 50 to 100 miles a day for several days in a row. It's okay if you're not, like I said, physically ready for that 100%. It doesn't mean it should be a breeze. I just think you should be able to do it. Because right now, if I were to bike 50 miles in a row for one day, my ass would be super sore. I'd probably have some friction spots on my inner thighs and stuff like that, but I could do it. I know for a fact I could do it, and I could do that for several days in a row. Yes, I would be hurting because it's not something I do every day, but I know for a fact I could do it. And in a serious bug out situation, that's what I probably would do if I couldn't use vehicle, is use my bicycle or find other bicycles, whatever, and because it's just simply much, much faster. But that is still physically strenuous, especially if you're not in a flat area or if you're carrying a bunch of gear. So I think that that's a basic benchmark. You should at least be able to bike for, multiple hours a day for several days in a row without being completely destroyed. You still should have to be effective at the end of this journey. You can't be totally wiped out, not alert at all, things like that. Third on the list is being able to jog continuously, run/jog. Doesn't have to be a full-out sprint, but continuously running without stopping for anywhere from like 3 to 6 or 7 miles. Pace is not really as important, but there's several situations where you're going to need to hustle, probably more so than just a strict walk, for maybe several miles at a time. Could be all sorts of reasons why you might need to do that, but there's no reason why I think you need to train so often that you could run 20, 30 miles. That's certainly, if that's what you want to do, go for it. but I don't think that that's something that's necessary to have in your physical toolbox. But running 3 or 4 miles, without being completely wrecked and without having to constantly stop, I think that's something that most people should be able to do to be reasonably prepared for serious situations. Fourth on the list is sprinting. I think you should be able to do a 100% all-out sprint for short distances of time, maybe like 10 to 50 meters, something like that, multiple times in a row, very short period of time, and be able to do complex tasks in between those without being completely winded, without completely losing your situational awareness, without having your heart almost explode. Something like a run and gun type thing that people do, whether that complex task can be performing first aid, lining up a shot and actually making it, reloading, starting a car. It doesn't have to be, you're not going to have to defuse a bomb or something like that probably, but, something to where you can do something incredibly strenuous physically and not just be completely useless 20 seconds later. And then do another burst of physical activity, things like that, and still be able to perform certain functions. So sprint workouts, things like that are very important because that's probably the most likely of the things so far, besides just walking, is having to do 100% effort, certain things for short amounts of time, and then have to do something important at the end of it or in the middle of it. So that's a big component. I think everyone should train to be able to do that. Number 5 is an interesting one, and I'll have to see if some people might disagree with me on this, but I think it's very important, particularly because it's a weak area for a lot of people. It's not something that you almost ever encounter in day-to-day life. With unlike walking or even running, it's something that people at least occasionally do usually. But 5 on my list is to be able to support yourself hanging from either a bar or a ledge, weighted either with whatever you'd be wearing, maybe even a backpack, but certainly with the normal clothes and boots and your shoes and everything like that, for at least 30 seconds to around a minute. It doesn't sound like a lot, but until you try it, it's actually fairly difficult for most people to hang for, especially with any kind of weight on them, for around a minute or so. So there's plenty of situations where that could be important. And even if it's not directly analogous to that, where you're literally hanging off a ledge, there's plenty of situations where you might be trying to help keep someone from falling over, drag them along, things like that. Certainly if you do fall over a ledge and are able to grab the edge, you want to be able to not just instantly lose your grip. So I think that's an important just kind of benchmark for that level of strength. Number 6 is along the same lines, and that's to be able to pull yourself up onto a ledge if you're hanging from it. So you have to have enough time to be able to do that. And I think you should focus on being able to do this in 2 different ways. One, like a wall to where you can use your feet to kind of walk yourself up, but also with just a ledge to where you're free hanging, like over the edge of an awning or something like that, or a railing, to where there's nothing that you can put your feet on and you have to pull yourself up on to the ledge. And it's okay to swing your leg up and put it up there. That's one way to do it, as long as you can do it. But you have to have certain levels of flexibility and grip and static strength to be able to hold your arms flexed in a hang like that. And that's not something that people have to do very often. It's not something that a lot of people even train for when they work out regularly, but it's something that in a real world situation can come up fairly often, and would be very important to be able to maintain that position if it does come up, because you don't ever want to fall from any height. It could be seriously catastrophic. Number 7 continues with the climbing and grip sort of strength to some extent, and it's something that a lot of people are surprisingly bad at if they've never done it before, and that's climb a rope. You would be shocked, or maybe not be shocked, but I'm certainly shocked when I find out how few people can climb a rope. Even people who are relatively strong, maybe you can even do a couple pull-ups. There is some technique involved. Unless you're going to completely power through it without using your legs at all, there is some level of technique there. And I grew up with, my grandfather had a rope swing at his place, so we were always climbing on it. And to me, it's like second nature now, and I can do it without using a lot of strength. I did it as a scrawny, less than 100-pound kid, so I definitely know it's not a strength issue. I can climb it now using strength also if I need to where my legs are completely limp and just using my arms, which is fairly difficult. But if you get the technique right, which is part of it, or it's a huge part of it, then you can get to a point where you can just even like camp out on hanging on a rope, and not even hold on really with your hands. You just kind of hook it so you don't fall back. So it would seem crazy to me that you could be in a position where you need to get up out of a pit or up over a wall or a ledge, and someone gives you a rope and you still can't get out of there. That would be a disaster. Or if it's just completely exhausting to simply climb up a rope to get out of a position that you're in, that would be utterly disastrous. So definitely something you should train. if it's kind of hard to find spots to train that in, unfortunately. That's probably why so many people are bad at it, but some CrossFit gyms will have it. Some free parks might have it. I know back in Florida, the university had a track and they had a rope behind it, which is awesome. But it's not something that's that easy to find. A lot of the like ninja style parkour gyms, things like that, will have ropes. But look around at your public parks and things like that and your CrossFit gyms and just try to find some way to practice that skill. If you have a property with like trees and things like that, you can certainly hang your own, and you can get one of the battle ropes that they use, or just like an anchor rope, whatever they call it. I will say if it's a synthetic material, they're even harder to climb because they're slippery, but you can leave them outside. If you get like a cotton rope or something that's made of natural fibers and you leave it tied to a tree, it's eventually going to rot and you're probably going to fall and bust your ass. So I don't recommend doing that. But definitely practice climbing ropes. The thinner the rope, the more difficult it is. Something like a climbing rope is incredibly difficult to climb up just barehanded without having ascenders or anything like that. So I recommend, using a bigger rope. And that's it. That is the list of 7 things that I think preppers should be able to do physically as just a basic benchmark for physical preparedness. There's all sorts of other stuff you can do physically that's fantastic. Of course, any sort of weightlifting and cardiovascular exercise, metabolic conditioning, CrossFit types workouts, stuff like that is all good. There's no type of fitness preparation that's going to be bad. There's probably some that are going to be more useful than others in shit advanced scenarios, but there's nothing you can do to prepare your body that's going to hurt you in any way, certainly. I mean, unless it's to the extent that you're neglecting other things. But certainly stuff like push-ups, pull-ups, like any sort of ab exercises and leg raises, things like that. Martial arts and sports certainly get you in good shape for explosive movements, hand-eye coordination, things like that. Stuff like box jumps and Olympic lifts are good for explosive movements and explosive conditioning. Things like farmer carries and grip works are really good to represent, carrying maybe ammo cases, jugs of water, stuff like that that's fairly heavy. Sled pulls and pushes may be useful for if you have to drag a game cart, or if you're bugging out with a shopping cart and have to push all your gear in it, things like that. Or sandbag carries represent picking up an injured person, stuff like that can be definitely very, very difficult if you've never done it before, and especially if you haven't learned good techniques for doing it. A lot of these specific things like climbing up over ledge, picking up a person, climbing a rope, you can, muscle your way through it if you get in really good shape, but there's a huge technique component to it too that will allow you to accomplish that task using a lot less strength if you know how to do it properly. So that's what I recommend doing, is focusing on both aspects of those. Let me know what you guys think about these physical benchmarks. If you would add some, if you think some are too easy or too harsh, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.